I faked my death to escape my family, but they found me. I was 28 when I decided to disappear. Not just move away, not just change my number, I mean truly vanish, fake my death kind of vanish. And I didn't do it to escape a criminal past or to avoid debt. I did it because the weight of my family had grown so suffocating, so corrosive, that leaving quietly no longer felt like a viable option. My childhood was the kind that seemed normal on the outside. We lived in a suburban neighborhood, with matching mailboxes and manicured lawns. My father was a well-regarded doctor in our town, my mother the kind of woman who baked pies for charity events. But behind the pastel curtains, our family functioned like a pressure cooker with no release valve. My father ruled the house like a warden. Every mistake was a sin, every emotion a weakness. My mother, though outwardly warm, existed as a shadow of his control. And my younger brother, well, he had learned early on to side with power. I often wondered if he'd ever seen me as a sibling or just another rival in a home where love was given out like rations. By the time I was 18, I had already tried to escape in smaller ways. Moving to another city for college, blocking their numbers, even therapy. But they always found a way back in. My mother would cry until I gave in. My father would threaten to ruin me financially. And my brother, once, hacked into my email and forwarded years of personal messages to my boss. He claimed it was a joke. I knew better. Over the next decade, the intrusions became more strategic, more manipulative. When I got engaged at 25, they pressured my fiancée until she broke it off. They said she wasn't family material. When I tried to buy a condo, my father contacted the seller and convinced them I was mentally unstable. Every time I thought I had broken free, their hands reached through the cracks and pulled me back under. I started researching new identities the night I came home to find my apartment ransacked. Nothing was stolen, just rearranged. My brother left a sticky note on my pillow with one word: careful. I knew what he meant. It wasn't a threat of violence. It was a reminder. They were always watching. From that point, I became methodical. I read forums, talked to people on the dark web, studied how others had vanished. I sold off my assets slowly over 6 months, used cash only, created fake debts to explain my growing instability to coworkers. I left signs of depression, missed appointments, late bills, online searches for suicide methods. I staged it all like a tragic spiral. On a rainy Thursday in October, I parked my car on the edge of a cliff by the ocean and left the door open. I dropped an old hoodie, waded with rocks into the surf, and walked away barefoot, leaving my shoes near the edge. The current was strong enough to drag debris for miles. My body was never found, but my death was believed. I resurfaced 3 states away under a new name. It was nothing dramatic, no plastic surgery, no fake accents, just a carefully assembled identity with paper trails I'd crafted through months of effort. I became someone quiet, unremarkable, the kind of person who forgets to return calls and blends into coffee shop backgrounds. That was intentional. I found a small town where nobody asked too many questions and rented a room above a used bookstore owned by an old man who didn't believe in computers. He let me pay cash, no questions asked, and seemed more interested in his collection of rare sci-fi than in anything I was doing upstairs. The first few weeks felt like breathing after nearly drowning. I'd wake up expecting panic, dread, the endless mental rehearsal of explanations for things I shouldn't need to explain. Instead, there was just silence. I started working part-time under the table, helping organize books in the store and painting over water stains in the ceiling. At night, I wrote. Not about my past, not yet, just stories that felt like mine, even if they weren't. A woman who vanished into a forest. A man who erased his name from every photograph. I found comfort in those narratives. They gave shape to what I'd done. Sometimes when I walked past a window and caught my reflection, I didn't recognize the man I saw. He wasn't broken or exhausted. He wasn't calculating his next excuse. He just existed. And that was a strange, intoxicating kind of peace. Months passed. I didn't speak to anyone from my former life. I deleted every trace of my online presence. I avoided phones, cameras, and bars. I didn't make friends. not because I didn't want them, but because it felt safer not to. I lived like a ghost, by choice this time. But freedom, it turns out, has its own kind of weight. One day in late spring, I found a note slid under my door. The handwriting was neat, precise, almost feminine. It read, "You're not as invisible as you think." At first, I thought it was paranoia, my mind playing tricks. Maybe it was a prank, a misunderstanding. I checked the hallway. Empty. I asked the bookstore owner if he'd seen anyone. He hadn't. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence, that someone else in the building got the wrong door. But the next day, another note appeared. This time, it simply said, "We miss you." And my blood ran cold. I hadn't used my old name in nearly a year. I hadn't left any digital footprint. I hadn't made contact with anyone. Yet, somehow someone had found me. I stopped sleeping properly after that. Every creak in the building became a warning. I started locking the door twice, wedging a chair beneath the knob like I used to as a kid when my father would come home drunk. That same knot of fear returned, tying itself into my stomach tighter each night. But the third note was different. It came not under my door, but in my coat pocket. I had left my jacket hanging by the store's front entrance, something I'd done 100 times before. I hadn't even thought twice about it. But now, inside the pocket, was a folded slip of paper that said, "We forgive you. Come home." It was the word home that broke me. Not because I missed it, but because it was never really a home. Not to me. That house, that family, those rituals of fake smiles and clinking silverware were cages built of politeness and control. They'd never seen me, not really. So why would they want me back now? And more importantly, how did they know where I was? I went to the bookstore owner and asked if anyone had come in asking for me. He looked at me, blinking, as if I'd asked whether the sun had stopped rising. "Only the usual customers," he said. "No one new. No one looking for trouble." Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. So I stopped working. I barely left my room. I ordered groceries under a fake name to a locker 2 blocks away. I changed my routine. I shaved my beard, dyed my hair, even started wearing glasses I didn't need. I tried to become invisible again. But paranoia has a way of hollowing you out. I started seeing faces that looked familiar. A woman with my mother's posture. A man with my brother's jawline. Always too far to confirm. Always gone too quickly. And then the letters stopped. Weeks passed. Nothing. Until one night, I woke to the sound of the front door of the bookstore creaking open. It wasn't unusual for the old man to come in early, but this wasn't early. It was 2:13 a.m. exactly. I remember because I checked the clock as soon as I heard it. I froze. Then, footsteps on the stairs. Slow. Measured. One by one, the boards creaked beneath them. That same rhythm I remembered from childhood. The way my father's feet landed heavy on the last 3 steps. I stood there in the dark, holding my breath, heart pounding so hard I could feel in my ears. I didn't move. I couldn't. But the footsteps never reached my door. They stopped right outside it. And then nothing. No knock. No voice. No retreating steps. Just silence. I waited an hour, maybe more, before I had the courage to open the door. The hallway was empty, but taped to the outside of my door was a photograph. It was a picture of me, taken through my window, sleeping. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even breathe for several seconds. My body locked into itself, as if refusing to accept that it had just happened. A photograph of me, taken through the window, while I slept. It was undeniable proof that someone was not only watching me, but could reach me whenever they wanted. I spent the next hour staring at the photo, analyzing every corner of it, every reflection, every shadow. The angle suggested the photo was taken from the building across the alley. I crept to the window and looked out, scanning every window in the adjacent structure. No lights, no movement, just rows of darkened glass panes, staring blankly back at me. I knew I couldn't stay. By morning, I was packed. I left a note for the bookstore owner. Nothing specific, just a thank you and a goodbye. I took a different name, a different train, a different life. Again, the next town was smaller. Fewer people. Fewer questions. I rented a room in the back of a bakery owned by a woman in her 60s who had a laugh like gravel and arthritis in both hands. She didn't care who I was. As long as I paid rent and didn't burn the place down, I was invisible again. And for a while it worked. I picked up a night job stocking shelves, wore gloves, kept my head down, never used a phone. I moved like a ghost, exactly the way I'd learned to. Months passed. The fear never left me, but it softened into a manageable pulse under the surface of things. I almost convinced myself I had escaped again, until the bakery received a delivery that no one had ordered. A small box, no return address, just my current alias, handwritten in red marker. Inside, a photograph of my high school bedroom, a lock of my hair, the same color it had been before I dyed it. A receipt from the exact locker where I used to pick up groceries 2 towns back. I left that same night. No warning, no goodbyes, just the road again. Another name, another train station in the dark. But something was changing. The pattern was tightening. Whoever this was, it wasn't just my family anymore. This was someone who didn't want to bring me home. This was someone who wanted to break me. And I was starting to feel it. Not just the fear, the confusion, the isolation, the cracks forming in the edges of my identity. Was I still me, if no one ever said my name? If no one knew my past, or my voice on my birthday? If I had to erase every part of myself to survive? Who was I actually protecting? I kept moving. I kept hiding. But then came the letter that changed everything. No name, no return address. Just one line, typed neatly on a slip of white paper. You're not who you think you are. Let me know to continue with part 5, and I'll keep going. The paper was clean. No fingerprints. No watermark. No creases except the precise folds that allowed it to slide perfectly into the plain, white envelope. It felt more like a threat than a mystery. You're not who you think you are. I stared at those words for hours. They didn't make sense. They weren't like the other messages. The photos, the hair, the clues that reminded me I was being hunted. This was different, personal. It hinted at something deeper, not just surveillance, but something wrong with my very understanding of myself. I tried to shake it, tossed the letter into the fireplace of the abandoned motel room I was squatting in. I watched it curl into ash and told myself it was meaningless, but it burrowed into me. The next day I took a risk. I accessed an old secure line I'd used once in a different life. Through it, I contacted someone I hadn't spoken to in over 5 years, a private investigator who had once helped me cover my tracks when I first disappeared. His name was Marcus. He owed me a favor. When I called, he answered immediately. No pleasantries. No, how have you been? Just a long pause and then, you shouldn't have contacted me. I asked why. He hesitated again. Then, because someone already did. Looking for you. Weeks ago. I froze. Marcus explained that someone, anonymous, heavily funded, sophisticated, had traced some of my original escape routes. They didn't know exactly where I was, but they were close. Too close. Then he said something that still chills me. They weren't trying to find you. They were trying to find out what you know. That didn't make sense. I didn't know anything. I wasn't a whistleblower or a criminal. I was just a kid who faked their death to get away from a nightmare. But apparently, that wasn't the full story. Marcus offered to dig deeper. I wired him a small payment and waited. In the meantime, I left town again. Moved north. Took backcountry roads. Hitchhiked when I could. Avoided cameras. Threw away my phone again. I began to dream less of escape and more of permanence. Of some final vanishing so thorough that even I wouldn't recognize myself anymore. 3 weeks later, a package arrived. No return label. Just a USB drive. I plugged it into a burner laptop and found a single video file. It was grainy, low quality. Surveillance footage from what looked like a private office. The camera was hidden in a ceiling corner, angled down at a wooden desk. A man sat behind it, graying, lean, and stern. It was my father, but not the man I remembered. This version of him was cold, military, sharp. He was speaking on the phone. The audio was faint, but clear enough. No, she doesn't know. She still thinks she ran. It's better this way. If she ever finds out what happened before she was born, we lose everything. My blood ran cold. That was the first time I realized something horrifying. My father didn't just make my life unbearable. He didn't just control, manipulate, and hurt. He had lied about who I was, about my origin. Whatever I thought I was escaping, it was only the surface. There was something underneath all of this. A truth buried so deep, someone had spent years, decades, maybe, making sure I would never find it. But now I had to. That grainy video kept playing in a loop in my mind, even after I closed the laptop, destroyed the USB, and buried the pieces in 3 separate dumpsters miles apart. I tried to pretend I was still in control, still running the show, but something had shifted. It wasn't just about staying hidden anymore. It was about finding out the truth. I no longer felt like the one on the run. I felt like a living piece of someone else's puzzle, a project, a secret, maybe even a lie. I stopped sleeping. I started collecting information again, slowly, carefully. I requested public records under aliases. I dug into old hospital archives. I followed the shadows of people who had once hovered around my family, but who I was told never mattered. I started with my birth. The records were fuzzy. My birth certificate looked real, dated, signed, and official. But something was off. The hospital listed on it had burned down 3 years after I was supposedly born. But when I searched for archived patient lists from the time, I found no trace of my mother. No trace of me. Then came the real punch in the gut. The midwife listed on my birth certificate had died 2 months before the date. I stared at that fact for hours. It couldn't be a typo. My father always controlled every detail. If he forged something, it was intentional. So why fake the identity of the person who supposedly helped bring me into the world? Unless I wasn't born where I thought I was. Maybe not even when I thought I was. It was around this time that Marcus went dark. His last message was short. They're on me. Don't reply. Go south. Don't trust anyone who calls you by your old name. I never heard from him again. But what he sent before that message was more valuable than anything I'd found on my own. It was a scanned document, retrieved from a declassified government archive. The file was incomplete, but what remained was enough. It detailed a covert program in the early 2000s. The title was Project Cathedra. The description was redacted. Entire paragraphs blacked out. But a single line stood untouched. Subjects were genetically engineered from selected DNA profiles to test cognitive imprinting and loyalty conditioning. Below that, 6 names. 5 were redacted. 1 was partially visible. HRYNW. My name wasn't Catherine, but something about it made my stomach drop. It reminded me of an old nickname my father used for me when I was little, something I always hated, never understood. Ren. At the time, I thought it was just his weird attempt at affection. Now I wasn't so sure. Was I one of those subjects? Had I been created, not born? Conditioned, not raised? The thought made me sick. I began to question every memory, every scar, every panic attack that never made sense. Every time I had reacted to a situation like I wasn't even in control. Had he programmed me? Had I been part of something that required my total obedience? Something I escaped before it could finish? I couldn't confront him, but I had to find him again. Not to ask questions, not for reconciliation. I needed to see the truth in his eyes, to confirm whether I was ever real. I headed back toward the city I grew up in for the first time in years. But I didn't go back as myself. I was a ghost with no name. I shaved my head, changed my walk, my voice. I wore contact lenses that blur the color of my eyes. And I got a job in the basement of a corporate building owned by one of my father's many shell companies. He was still running things, still wearing suits, still pretending none of this had happened. Every week, I got a little closer. I memorized security patterns, learned names, traced emails, until one day, I saw it on a monitor, him, sitting in a boardroom, talking casually to executives like he wasn't a monster. That's when I knew. He didn't just erase my past. He replaced it. He had created an entire empire, not of wealth, but of illusion. Everything was curated. His legacy, his companies, even the people he kept close. They weren't colleagues or friends. They were tools. And I had been one of them. Not just a daughter. Not even a soldier. Something worse. A prototype. Working beneath the same building where he reigned felt like walking through a graveyard of erased truths. I was buried in the data centers, a ghost among servers. But I learned how to access the system from below, how to creep into corners of the network no one bothered to encrypt properly, because no one expected an attack from within. In one folder, hidden in layers of backup logs, I found a name I hadn't seen in years, Ren0. My hand shook. It was a project log. There were files, video recordings, medical reports, behavioral assessments, none of them with my name, just the code name, Ren0. Each log entry detailed changes to subject response to external trauma stimuli. There were timelines of stress induction protocols, reward/punishment loops. One entry read, Ren0 continues to exhibit moral resistance during simulations. Re-imprinting attempted. Temporary success. Follow-up scheduled. Another. Subject escape training parameters during Phase 5. Initiate contingency extraction protocol. Memory suppression failed. Containment required. I stared at that line. Memory suppression failed. So they tried to erase me. And I remembered anyway. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I had been rewired. And then I broke the wiring. And then I ran. Every night, I lay awake in my shitty apartment above a diner. I pieced it together. The panic attacks. The dreams I never understood. Rooms with no doors. Voices speaking in soft tones behind two-way mirrors. The smell of bleach. That wasn't trauma from abuse. It was testing. I wasn't just a child. I was a controlled environment. The woman I thought was my mother? No birth records. No hospital photos. Not even a single verifiable ID number in public archives. She didn't exist. She was a handler. A voice designed to comfort me into obedience. A mother. Fabricated. And my father? The man who called me Ren, who smiled with dead eyes and taught me to shoot at age 6. Just for safety? He wasn't protecting me. He was building me. From the ground up. A weapon made soft with a pretty face and a tragic story. And when I cracked under the weight of my own self-awareness, they tried to bring me back. But I ran too far. Until now. Now I was here. Inside his walls. Inside his systems. And I had access. I didn't want revenge. I wanted exposure. I wanted truth. So I started uploading what I found. Encrypted files. Redacted memos. Partial audio logs. I found forums. Whistleblower archives. Decentralized journalist networks. I dripped it out piece by piece. Carefully. Making it look like a leak from a former employee. But even as I uploaded them, I felt the news tighten. I noticed people trailing me at night. Once I came home and found my window cracked open. The wind didn't do that. My neighbor, an old woman who left me cookies every Sunday, suddenly moved out without saying goodbye. The guy who worked the night shift at the convenience store near my place disappeared. I was being watched, but I couldn't stop. I had come too far, and if I was going to disappear again, it had to be on my terms. So I planned one last act. A full drop. Everything I had. Not to Reddit. Not to some blog. To every major news outlet. Simultaneously. And in the center of it all, a confession. Not from me. From him. Because hidden in one of the backup servers was a video. Old. Grainy. Dated 15 years ago. In it, he sat at a table, speaking to someone off-screen. His voice calm. His hands folded. You can break anyone. Morality is a variable. It's just about repetition. Pressure. Then reward. If the subject bonds to the right stimulus, they'll obey forever. He laughed. Softly. You just have to be patient. I downloaded it. Protected it behind 3 layers of encryption. And I sent it. Everything. Within 48 hours, the world exploded. After I sent the last data packet, everything changed, but not in the way I expected. At first, the silence was louder than I imagined. No arrests. No headlines. No trending hashtags. It felt like the world absorbed the truth and chose to spit it back out. For a moment, I thought I had failed. But then, the cracks started to show. A minor blogger from an obscure cybersecurity site mentioned a leak possibly tied to legacy corporate black ops. Then a former employee posted anonymously that the files were real, though only a fraction of the actual archive. Then came a thread on a major tech forum. Then Reddit. Then WikiLeaks. Then the news. Not just online. Cable, radio, podcasts, press briefings. Every outlet started running some version of the story. Allegations of child conditioning experiments in corporate black sites linked to prominent CEO. Of course, no one said my name. No one had it. I had wiped that part clean. But his name? All over the news. They tried to spin it. His lawyers claimed deep fakes and AI manipulation. The board released a statement. We are cooperating with federal agencies and conducting an internal audit. He even made an appearance himself. He sat down in a suit, looked right into the camera, and said, "These allegations are not only false, they are impossible. I have always believed in innovation through ethical practices." And for a moment, people bought it. But then the second wave hit. More leaks. Not from me, from others. Ex-employees, lab technicians, data analysts. Some of them had saved things. Screenshots, badges, security footage. They saw my leak and realized they weren't alone anymore. The story caught fire. The company's stock crashed. Sponsors pulled out. Senators demanded hearings. An international tribunal launched an independent investigation. And then the arrest came. Not for everything, just enough. Financial fraud, tampering with medical records, unauthorized human testing. They never called it what it really was. Psychological warfare on a child. Me. But they locked him up anyway. Not in some high-security facility. House arrest, cushy conditions, PR management. But he was caged. And everyone knew what he had done. His name became a curse. Investors abandoned him. Universities stripped him of honorary degrees. His face disappeared from ads. His name was pulled from buildings. His empire didn't collapse. But it cracked. It would never be whole again. As for me, I disappeared. I changed my name. Burned the last of the IDs I ever had. Got rid of my phone, went offline completely. I didn't want fame. Didn't want a book deal. Didn't want sympathy. I wanted peace. I moved to a small town near a cold coast. Got a job at a bookstore where no one asked questions. I don't talk about my past. Don't try to explain who I was. Because even I don't really know. Some nights I still wake up sweating, hearing his voice say my name. Not the name I chose. The one he gave me. Ren. But I always whisper back the same word. No. Because I took everything he gave me and turned it into a weapon against him. I wasn't his experiment. I wasn't his daughter. I was the end of his story. And this time, I wrote the final page.